All right, let's dive into the high-stakes power struggle between Donald Trump and the European countries. And I want you to forget everything you think you know about traditional diplomacy. We're going to look at this through a completely different lens, the cold, hard logic of power itself. We're talking strategy, psychology, and the fallout when things go wrong.
And really, this is the question at the heart of it all. What happens when a great power can't tell the difference between being strong and being alone? This isn't just some philosophical debate. It's the real-world tightrope the entire Western alliance is walking right now.
So, to really get what's going on, we have to shift our thinking. We're throwing out the normal diplomacy playbook. Instead, we're looking at this as a raw game of power psychology, almost like we're cracking open a copy of Robert Greene's The 48 Laws of Power.
And that's why this is so important. We're ignoring the press conferences, the speeches, the official explanations. None of that really matters. What matters are the patterns. What are the players actually doing? What are the gut instincts driving their decisions? Because that, right there, is where you find the truth.
This quote, wow, this really gets to the heart of a huge psychological shift. See, anger is one thing. You can negotiate with anger. You can manage it. But when confusion turns into clarity, when an entire continent stops wondering what's going on and starts seeing you as the problem, that's a whole different ballgame.
So how does that big shift happen? Well, a massive alliance doesn't just blow up overnight. It's usually much quieter than that. It often starts with something really subtle, just a change in the words you use to describe a friend.
Just look at this progression here. It's a deliberate playbook. First, they're your allies. Then you start calling them unreliable. Next, they become uncooperative. And the final step, systemic adversary. That's not just an insult. That's strategic language. And it's exactly the term European leaders are now using when they talk about the United States under Donald Trump.
Now, what's fascinating is that this whole approach, it breaks one of the biggest rules in the power playbook. You never, ever force your opponents to team up against you. The moment you become the common threat, you give them the one thing they need to forget their own squabbles and focus all their energy on you.
And that is the great irony in all of this. I mean, for decades, European unity has been this slow, painful process. But the analysis here suggests that the pressure campaign from the Trump administration, threatening their economy, their security, it did what Europe could never quite do on its own. It gave a fractured continent a single, unifying purpose.
So where did this all come to a head? You might be surprised. The analysis we're looking at points to one specific, symbolic moment where everything changed, and it all revolved around a remote island, Greenland.
Now you might be thinking, Greenland? Why on earth Greenland? Because in these power games, symbols are often way more important than the literal facts. Donald Trump's bid to buy the island wasn't seen as just some quirky real estate deal. For Europe, it was a symbolic grenade thrown at the entire post-World War II order, the fundamental idea that borders are sacred. And that move triggered another core law of power, the law of precedent. Once a major player openly shatters a core rule, like respecting sovereignty, every other nation on the board has to look around and think, okay, if they can do it to them, they can do it to us. It creates this ripple effect of fear and suspicion.
This is exactly why European leaders started seeing a disturbing parallel between Donald Trump's rhetoric about Greenland and Vladimir Putin's actions in Ukraine. To them, the playbook looked chillingly similar. A powerful nation uses national security as an excuse to take land, rewriting history and completely ignoring the will of the people who actually live there.
Okay, so Europe feels like it's being backed into a corner. What happens next? Do they just take it? Well, this is where things get interesting. This is where we see years of quiet resentment finally start to turn into real strategic leverage.
I mean, just look at this contrast. It's jarring. On one side, you have America's traditional European allies. They're getting hit with sanctions, travel bans, treated like obstacles. And on the other side, Russia. Sanctions are being lifted. Officials are welcome for meetings. For European leaders, this wasn't just a policy shift. It felt like the world had been turned upside down.
And let's be super clear, this wasn't just talk. We're talking about concrete actions. Sanctioning European officials, hitting them with travel bans, actively working to undermine their regulations, and siding with Russia in private. It was a relentless pressure campaign that created what the source material calls a coalition of wounded pride.
But this entire strategy was built on one massive, critical mistake. It violated the law of leverage. It's like playing poker and assuming you're the only one at the table with good cards. But Europe has its own massive leverage, economic, legal, diplomatic. And they were being pushed to a point where they might just have to play their hand.
And that's the countermove we're seeing now. The conversation in Europe is shifting. The talk is over. They are now actively signaling that they are ready and willing to use their own considerable power to defend their interests.
So this brings us to the final and, frankly, the most dangerous part of this whole story, the end game. This is the point where things take on a life of their own, where momentum starts to replace rational choices, and it feels like a train that just can't be stopped.
The source material lays out a pretty chilling logic here. First, any power that acts like there are no limits, no rules, no moral lines, no practical boundaries, is basically sending out an invitation for its own collapse. Then, you add isolation to the mix. Systematically taking a hammer to your own alliances doesn't make you look strong. It just makes you brittle. It makes you incredibly vulnerable when the first real crisis hits.
And at the very core of it all is this huge psychological mistake, thinking that fear is the same thing as loyalty. It's not. Intimidation doesn't create allies, it creates resentment. And that resentment just sits there, waiting for a moment of weakness.
And it all leads to this one, crushing irony. The very actions that were designed to project overwhelming strength have, in the end, actually weakened America's real influence on the world stage. It's the classic definition of a self-defeating strategy.
And this really is the bottom line. This is the final calculation from Europe's perspective. They're done trying to persuade. They're done trying to negotiate. The goal has shifted. Now, they are simply preparing for whatever comes next.
Which leaves us all with one final, sobering question. After all the strategy, all the maneuvering, and all the broken rules, when this incredibly high-stakes game of power finally goes too far, who is it that actually pays the price?